So one of the big, big lies, shall we say, and myths that basically is still somehow seeped into public consciousness and people believe, even though they've been told many times it's not true. Let's once and for all finally debunk this myth that the UK was not sovereign when it was in the EU. It always was, still is now that we are still in, and guess what? We'll lose far more, and we've been into argument. But the big thing is this was an absolute myth from the word go. And today, I'm going to be reading, well, I would read the full thing. We're going to read, shall we say, the abridged Cliff Notes version of this, because this is how in-depth this paper actually went in to debunking this myth. The paper is called... So, the argument that Britain needs to leave the European Union to reclaim its sovereignty is misguided, says the new paper, Britain, the EU, and the Sovereignty Myth. And I'll leave a link to it so you can download the full thing. It goes into it quite extensively. And basically, if anyone ever on this channel now claims that the EU, that the Britain was not a sovereign nation, or that we are somehow reclaiming our sovereignty by leaving the EU, I'm just going to link them this link. Because you cannot argue with its, with what it's saying. It goes into it in depth. I read it. I challenge anyone to go into this paper and say that it's not true. Now, this paper itself comes from the Royal Institute of International Affairs. So, have at it, people, if you don't believe it. But we're just going to go over the summary of what this says and some of the points that it makes. So, the question of sovereignty lies at the heart of the UK's upcoming EU referendum. Many in Britain believe that the process of EU decision-making has undermined Britain's parliamentary democracy, and that leaving the EU is the only way for British people to regain control of their sovereignty. This ignores the fact that successive British governments have chosen to pool assets of the country's sovereign power in the EU in order to achieve national objectives that they could not have achieved on their own, such as creating the single market, enlarging the EU, constraining Iran's nuclear program, and helping to design an ambitious EU climate change strategy. And there are lots more in that paper. So, apart from EU immigration, the British government still determines the vast majority of policy over every issue of greatest concern to British voters, including health, education, pensions, welfare, monetary policy, defence and border security. The arrangements for leaving also ignore the fact that the UK controls more than 98% of this public expenditure. So next point, the British economy has prospered under the EU. The UK boasts higher economic growth and lower unemployment than most major developed economies. It attracts the most foreign direct investment in the EU and is ranked among the most open places to do business in the developed world. The British economic weakness, such as low growth in productivity, are self-inflicted. So, however, a successful economy and free movement rules have led to high levels of immigration from the EU. Overall, this has been positive for the UK, but has exacerbated pre-existing pressures on public services and have restricted wage growth in some sectors, and is a source of widespread public concern. And this is again down to the fact that it's a government problem, not an EU problem, to solve this. And the government has done nothing to solve it, which has exacerbated these problems. So, next point. It is time, therefore, to return economic and political sovereign power entirely to Westminster. The risks of doing so are extreme. For example, the UK would be excluded from the process of EU rulemaking, of EU rule writing, making it a less attractive location for foreign investment. The UK is unlikely to strike better trade deals alone than it currently has with the EU, and the UK would have no say in the design of a more open EU markets for digital, financial and other services. Leaving would also have a destabilising effect on the rest of the EU, which will remain Britain's largest market. So again, people who say, oh, we don't need the EU. Yeah, it's only our largest market, but you know. So in contrast, the main risks to the UK of remaining are political. High levels of immigration from the EU would persist. However, it is incontrovertible that the EU will enlarge to include Turkey in the foreseeable future, and that the UK and other EU states retain a veto over this decision. So, the next point is nor need the UK fear the emergence of a more integrated Eurozone, which will continue to feature profound differences in the national outlook and is unlikely to enlarge quickly. EU decision-making overall is also becoming more intergovernmental rather than centralised. So continuing to pool its sovereign power selectively in the EU would enable the UK to design integrated EU responses to many challenges that it cannot resolve on its own. These include challenges of energy efficiency and sustainability, energy security, internet governance, and the fight against terrorism. In a world where there is more independence today than there was in the UK when it joined the European Economic Community in 1973, the notion of absolute British sovereignty is an illusion. It is also worthless if it limits the ability of future British governments to ensure the security and prosperity of their citizens. Judging from the UK's expenditure and its future prospects, the opportunities for remaining in the EU far outweigh the risks of doing so, and the risks of leaving far outweigh the opportunities. You know, and this isn't new, by the way. This is published back on the 9th of May 2016. So this debunking, paper, and again, I'll leave a link below. You can read the full thing. That was just the summary of the points. It goes into a lot more detail on those points. So from now on, when everyone says that we need to, leave to retain our sovereignty, well, I'm just going to post that link. Because there's no argument, I'm sorry, but there is no argument against that. We always were a sovereign nation. We haven't lost any sovereign power. So, there you go. I don't know what more you can say about it, but there you go. And Brexiteers still perpetuate this myth, by the way. So, if you see someone spreading this myth, maybe send them this video. Maybe that might change their minds a bit.